Dead in Hollywood.
A land out of time and out of place, where ghostly pirates guard unclaimed treasures, and dead movie stars roam its beaches.
I've always been terrified, still am, of water, dark water, seawater.
Catalina Island straddles that fuzzy line between fact and folklore, where logic and legend are blurred beyond recognition.
Out in the blue Pacific, 20 miles from flying fish flies by Santa Catalina Island.
Go behind the sign on a journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, Catalina, the mysterious island. If you haven't been possessed by Catalina, what are you waiting for?
Natalie Wood, dead now at the age of 43.
Natalie Wood. Her body was found floating in the water yesterday off Santa Catalina Island in California.
In the early hours of November 29, 1981, Natalie Wood went missing from her yacht, the Splendor, which was docked here at Isthmus Cove at Two Harbors. By morning, Natalie's body would be found floating face down, less than a mile from here at Blue Cavern Point.
Water, dark water, water, dark water.
Right there. Yeah.
Natalie Wood was only 43 when she died, but the circumstances surrounding her death remain one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. It didn't help matters that in 2018, the police named her husband, actor Robert Wagner, a person of interest in her death.
They reopened the Natalie Wood thing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever comment on that?
No, I never did.
You wouldn't cooperate with the...
Well, I had already had.
Only 4 people know for sure what happened, and one of them's dead. 2 aren't speaking, and the 4th, well, he won't shut up. Let's go behind the sign.
Once there was a little girl named Natalie Wood.
According to the legend, when Natalie was born, her mother Maria visited a psychic. The psychic warned Maria that her precious Natalia would one day be happy, rich, and famous, but would die by drowning.
I've always been terrified, still am, of water, dark water, seawater.
Years later, she almost did drown. In 1949, Natalie starred in The Green Promise. She had to run across a rickety bridge, rigged to collapse into a torrent of water after she reached the other side. A stagehand pulled a lever prematurely, and Natalie was thrown into the rushing water below. The current pulled her under, but she managed to cling to the edge of the rocks. Maria rushed the stage, but a stagehand held her back at the director's order. That shot was ultimately used in the film.
I've always been terrified, still am, of water, dark water.
So let's go, Catalina.
32 years after The Green Promise, Natalie would meet her untimely fate on Catalina. In 1972, Natalie remarried RJ on their friend's yacht. When the couple returned from their honeymoon, RJ bought a yacht and christened it Splendor after Natalie's Splendor in the Grass. They named the small attached dinghy Valiant after RJ's bomb of the movie, Prince Valiant. Natalie would ultimately meet her demise on Splendor, but for the last year and a half of her life, it was Natalie's floating sanctuary.
Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood, how about that? They got divorced and they got back together.
And then she slipped off the boat and died.
It was an accident.
And Christopher Walken, how do you explain that?
I don't know what he was doing on the boat.
I want to die. I'm sorry I've troubled you. I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want to worry anyone.
Natalie Wood, dead now at the age of 43.
The last 36 hours of Natalie's life consisted of an alcohol-charged chain of circumstances building to a tragic yet avoidable climax. the details of which remain as murky as the dark seawater Natalie believed would eventually take her life. When Natalie walked out the front door of her house for a Thanksgiving weekend on Catalina, her daughter Natasha begged her not to go. RJ had to pry Natasha off her mother. Natalie was disturbed by her daughter's reaction, but she was really looking forward to a nice, relaxing weekend on Catalina. Staying on the boat that weekend would be Natalie, RJ, Natalie's co-star in Brainstorm, Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern.
Weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed.
The weather was horrible when the foursome set sail for Catalina the day after Thanksgiving on November 27, 1981. Captain Davern tried numerous times to dissuade Natalie from setting sail. The stormy crossing to Catalina that Friday afternoon was the first sign of trouble. Another kind of storm was brewing inside the cabin. RJ's jealousy was on full display the moment Christopher Walken came aboard. Natalie had invited Walken in part to demonstrate to a suspicious RJ that nothing was going on between them.
I'm crazy about you.
It's a secret. That's the girl I'm gonna marry.
When the group arrived here at Avalon Bay, the drinking on the boat started right away. Natalie was mixing drinks, and RJ popped open a bottle of wine. Around 5 p.m., Natalie, RJ, and Walken went ashore, leaving Davern behind to prepare dinner. The trio drank beers and margaritas well into the evening here at the beachfront restaurant El Galeon. El Galeon is one of Catalina's oldest and most beloved restaurants. It's where Natalie and RJ celebrated one of their wedding anniversaries. Cheers to Natalie. The manager of El Galeon remembered the trio leaving for the dock around 10 p.m. They had been consuming alcohol for 10 hours by this point. 10 hours! I'm wasted, and I've only been drinking for an hour. Back at the dock, Natalie wouldn't get into the dinghy. It was cold and dark out. She was drunk and anxious about sailing off into the darkness. RJ somehow managed to calm her down and get her into the dinghy. Once back on the Splendor, the group continued drinking. Christopher Walken retired early to bed. 10+ hours of drinking and seasickness can have that effect on a person. What happened next would set the stage for the disturbing events which would lead to Natalie's biggest fear coming true. According to the captain, a fight between Natalie and RJ created an unbearable tension aboard the Splendor. She demanded that Davern take her ashore. In RJ's first police interview, he said nothing of that Friday night fight. So Natalie had the captain drive her back to shore in the Valiant. And once back on shore, Natalie and the captain went to El Galeon again. Natalie has the bartender make her reservations at the Pavilion Lodge, which is just over your shoulder, right over there. And while they're waiting on the bartender to make these reservations, Natalie and the captain have more drinks. So they're going on like hour 11 of drinking. And when they get to their rooms, they continue drinking for another 2 to 3 hours. Natalie had the bartender book her 2 rooms at the Pavilion Lodge, room 126 and room 219. They never saw the second room. The captain stayed with Natalie all night. Supposing nothing happened, they just talked and drank some more. Natalie was terrified of being alone. It's now Saturday morning, and the captain has convinced Natalie to go back to the Splendor in hopes of diffusing an already tense situation. By the time RJ wakes up, Natalie's mood had shifted drastically. She was even making her famous huevos rancheros. Everyone acted as though nothing had happened the night before. The group dropped their plans to return to the mainland and instead decided to ride out the rough waters at Two Harbors, a remote fishing village on the other side of Catalina. Natalie and the group arrived at Two Harbors around 11:30 a.m. on November 28. The harbor master assigned a mooring number N1, about 100 yards from shore. The weather took a turn for the worse, so the group drank aboard the Splendor most of the afternoon. RJ passed out, and Natalie and Walken took the Valiant ashore, leaving RJ a note. The co-stars drank at the bar at Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant. Outside, the weather was getting worse, but inside, Natalie and Walken were in a bubble, resuming their playfulness from the Brainstorm set. Natalie had a couple scenes left to shoot once they returned from Catalina. RJ woke up from his nap on the boat, irritated that his wife had gone off with Walken. When they failed to return, RJ had the captain take him ashore. He finds the charismatic co-stars having a fabulous time at the bar at Doug's. Natalie's already pretty drunk, and she'll continue to drink for the next 6 hours. can't beat them, you might as well join them. RJ made dinner reservations for 7 p.m. in the dining room. The foursome sat at the bar for the next 3 hours as a storm raged outside and one brewed inside. The captain noticed a jealous rage simmering in RJ. RJ felt like the odd man out.
I hate people who have to drink.
By the time the foursome sat down for dinner in the adjoining dining room, they were already wasted. Their waitress noticed Natalie's mood shift. She sent her meal back, saying that she would drink her dinner.
I think you better go on drinking, and I think I better go on drinking too.
The waitress also swore she saw Natalie and Walken holding hands under the table. The host of the restaurant told police that he saw RJ and Walken flirting with each other, and even a little touching going on between the two men. The 3-hour dinner consisted of 2 bottles of wine, 2 bottles of champagne, cocktails sent over by starstruck fellow diners, daiquiris ordered by Walken, and cognac for RJ and the captain. At one point, Natalie disappeared into the restroom. The waitress found Natalie brushing the hair of a 9-year-old girl and telling her how important it was to have a childhood.
Have you seen my childhood?
Back at the table, an accordion player played Laura's theme from Dr. Zhivago. Sometime afterward, Natalie threw a wine glass at the wall next to RJ. The tension escalated to a crescendo around 10 p.m. when RJ got up to leave. Their waitress was so worried about how drunk the group was, she phoned the harbor master. The harbor master saw Natalie and the group get into the dinghy, and he heard Natalie scream. A shoreboat driver actually saw Natalie stumble into the dinghy.
It takes a while, like anything else, and then you feel comfortable, even when you have to do scenes in a tank full of water.
Back aboard the Splendor, RJ was about to explode.
Stop! Don't you say it!
Walken later admitted to police that he and RJ had gotten into a small beef soon after returning. This seemed to disturb Natalie.
And I want them to stop behaving like mice and start behaving like men!
RJ was complaining that Natalie was away from home too much. She was away from the kids and it was hurting their home life. Walken sided with Natalie, so RJ smashed a wine bottle and said to Walken, "What do you want to do?"
Fuck my wife.
That's the first time I've heard you raise your voice in a long time.
Walken stepped out onto the freezing deck for some air, hoping to bring down the temperature inside the Splendor. Below deck, things were heating up even more.
Drops his eyes down to my boobs and licks his old chops.
That kind of talk is disgusting.
I'm not trying to whitewash my behavior. God knows, Brick, I'm not good. But I'm honest. Give me credit for just that, will you please? And Brick, Skipper is dead. I'm alive. Maggie the cat is alive. I'm alive.
When Walken returned around 10:30, Natalie had already turned in for the night.
All of you have been behaving like a bunch of pompous children.
Natalie would not be seen alive again. Within 45 minutes to an hour of Natalie retreating to her stateroom, she went missing from the Splendor. Shortly after 11 p.m., John Payne, the owner of a boat called the Capricorn, moored approximately 80 feet from the Splendor, thought he heard a woman crying for help.
You see her? I can't see a thing.
Payne turned on the top light atop the mast and scanned the dark water. He didn't see anything, and the woman's cries stopped around 11:30.
She's not yelling anymore, Mom.
RJ would not report Natalie missing from the Splendor until 1:30 in the morning. RJ thought Natalie had gone back to Doug's to drink at the bar. RJ was distraught and extremely panicky when the search at Two Harbors turned up empty. RJ and the captain both asked the harbor master not to contact the Coast Guard right away. They wanted to keep the search low-key. It would be another 6 hours after Natalie went missing that the Coast Guard was finally initiated. Around 6 a.m., the manager and cook of Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant discovered the dinghy tangled in kelp inside a small cave of Blue Cavern Point, where it had drifted about 1¼ miles northeast of the Isthmus Pier. Natalie was nowhere to be found. The key was turned off in neutral, with its oars still in place, suggesting that Natalie had never been in the dinghy. The discovery of the dinghy at 5:30 a.m. with no Natalie was an almost certain indication that her worst fear had come true. The owner of Doug's, who had joined the search for Natalie, spotted something red near the waters of Blue Cavern Point. It was Natalie. Her red nightgown had ballooned, acting as sort of a life preserver. Sadly, it was no lifesaver. The red nightgown had become Natalie's tomb. And so she floated out to sea from that mooring around Blue Cavern Point into those caves over there.
Actress Natalie Wood is dead at 43, the apparent victim of a drowning accident off Santa Catalina Island in California.
There were new developments today in the mystery surrounding the death of Natalie Wood.
The coroner's office said today that actress Natalie Wood was intoxicated and angry after an argument between her husband and actor Christopher Walken.
What was going through Natalie's mind as she drifted further and further away? Based on the amount of ocean water in her lungs, Natalie had remained alive for at least an hour in the water. All her life, she was told over and over again that she would drown one day. The psychic's prediction was actually coming true, and there was nothing she could do about it. No director yelling cut, no mother rushing to her aid, just dark seawater all around her. But the question remains, even to this day, how did Natalie end up in the sea that night?
The coroner's autopsy indicated Miss Wood had died by accident.
Shortly after midnight of the Sunday morning, she apparently attempted to get on to the dinghy, slipped and fell in the water, unable to return to the dinghy or the boat.
Got the report just now. It didn't surprise me, baby.
RJ had his own theory. Natalie wasn't trying to separate herself from the group, an accusation leveled by the coroner. Instead, Natalie slipped trying to tie up the dinghy, which had become loose and was knocking up against their stateroom.
She would have had to go out of to get to the dive step, which is right here. And the dinghy, supposedly, was tied up here.
When she slipped, Natalie grabbed onto the dinghy, but weighed down by her wool nightgown, kept pushing it further out to sea as she grabbed at it. She held on as long as she could.
Dennis, what happened that night? Was there an argument on the yacht?
That was the mainstream thinking until 30 years later when the captain started giving interviews to anyone who would listen. His version of events that night? After Natalie retired to her cabin, she returned and continued fighting with RJ on the deck. The next thing the captain knew, RJ had pushed Natalie overboard.
The argument got out of control. She was knocked unconscious by a physical fight from Robert Wagner and put in the water.
Less than 2 weeks after Natalie drowned, the LA County Sheriff's Department closed the case, calling Natalie's death an accidental drowning. Natalie's funeral was held on December 2nd, 1981 at Pierce Brothers.
I sort of felt like everything was taken away from me.
In 2011, the Sheriff's Department reopened the death investigation and amended Natalie's death certificate to drowning and other undetermined factors. Locals have reported seeing Natalie Wood's ghost walking the beach of Two Harbors, searching for closure that eludes her even in death, her spirit forever trapped where she died. Two Harbors has a long tradition of ghostly encounters and UFO sightings. In fact, Catalina is a hotbed of UFO and USO activity.
It all began on April 15, 1966, at approximately 9:45 a.m. An object with no tail and no visible means of propulsion was photographed over Catalina Island, traveling between 130 to 170 miles per hour. The craft, silver and disc-shaped, made no sound as it moved swiftly over the mountains and out of sight. This is the first recorded case of a UFO seen hovering around the island and over the channel. It wouldn't be the last. The dark, mysterious waters surrounding Catalina Island, one of the most active hotspots on Earth for reported USO sightings, unidentified submerged objects. On January 26, 1980, a pilot's reported encounter with a USO above the Santa Catalina Channel left one man dead and has become one of the seminal USO events in history. Noah Felice, a pilot with 14 years' experience, and his cousin Mark take off from Catalina Island, heading toward Las Vegas in Noah's 1972 Piper Cherokee. According to Felice, he spots an object in the water. As he loops around to get a better look, the unidentified object suddenly shoots out a beam of light that renders Noah's plane inoperable. Moments later, the plane falls over 1,000 feet into the deep waters of the channel. Noah is rescued. His cousin Mark does not survive.
The wreckage of the plane has never been recovered. Unless you're a UFO enthusiast, you've probably never heard of Thomas Townsend Brown. Take a stroll up Cemetery Road and pay a visit to the cemetery's most famous resident. Thomas Townsend Brown was an inventor who some claim discovered anti-gravity, an idea popular with the UFO community and spawning many conspiracy theories. Brown was allegedly part of the Philadelphia experiment, where a United States Navy experiment accidentally teleported the warship USS Eldridge. Comedian Phil Hartman wasn't technically buried on Catalina, but his ashes, along with his wives, were spread over the island.
I think I'm gonna like it here at Emerald Bay.
Hartman liked to escape to Catalina Island with his guy friends.
You're on TV!
BRYNN was so sure that her husband was gay that she hired a private investigator to follow him the 26 miles out to sea. The most scandalous thing the PI uncovered was the amount of pot Hartman smoked. BRYNN already knew this. Hartman was killed by his wife on May 28, 1998 in a gruesome murder-suicide. Natalie Wood is super famous. Phil Hartman, also famous. But Catalina's most famous resident is also one of the most famous women in the world. Before she was Marilyn Monroe, she was a 16-year-old housewife living on Catalina. In 1942, a 16-year-old Norma Jean Baker married 21-year-old James Doherty, a merchant marine soon to be stationed on Santa Catalina Island. Doherty would move his young bride to an apartment overlooking AVALON Harbor. The future Miss Marilyn Monroe spent the next year and a half living as a housewife, 26 miles off the coast of California.
Eyewitness, the big news of this week. He was 20, a war worker, then a merchant seaman. She was 16, confused, insecure, and she later said she married Jim Doherty to avoid returning to an orphanage. He remembers her as a good cook.
In 1942, the newlyweds bought a house in Van Nuys. It used to sit right here. It's now an industrial park. Shortly after moving to the house, Doherty joined the Merchant Marines, and the couple moved to Catalina Island, the birthplace of Marilyn Monroe. The White House apartment building at 314 Metropole Avenue looks a lot like the orphanage Norma Jean was running away from. But life on Catalina couldn't be further from that reality. No longer an orphan, Norma Jean settled into married life quite easily, even though she didn't feel like a married woman. Historians, for the most part, ignore this part of Marilyn's life. I don't know why. Because Catalina is where Norma Jean discovered Marilyn Monroe. So Marilyn learned her walk on Catalina in front of the sailors and the medics down on the shore, and her husband would mention that she could just turn it on like that, and you'd never seen anything like it. And Marilyn lived on the top floor in one of those apartments. I don't think we'll ever know exactly which apartment. Norma Jean no longer had to stare out her dormitory window at the RKO water tower, yearning for better days. Now she looked out her third-story window overlooking AVALON Harbor at a million twinkling stars reflecting on the ocean. Norma Jean had difficulty separating the sky from the earth, but she knew something those stars didn't. She could shine bigger and brighter than all of them combined. The first time Norma Jean felt like a star was on Catalina Island. Gladys brought Norma Jean for the summer when she was 7 years old. I remember going to the casino to dance with her. I didn't dance, but she let me sit on her lap and watch her. And I remember it was way after my bedtime too. At Christmas time, the Maritime Service held a big dance at the same casino, and Jimmy and I went. It was the funniest feeling to be dancing on that same floor 10 years later. I mean, being old enough and everything. Oh, it's hard to explain the feeling I had. The Catalina Casino, a Moorish building with a ballroom sitting on top of a grand theater, is the first landmark you see when approaching the island from the mainland. The casino holds the title as the world's largest circular ballroom and can accommodate over 3,000 dancers. French doors encircle the room, connecting the dance floor with the Romance Promenade, an open balcony running around the outside of the building with panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean. 7-year-old Norma Jean must have felt like Cinderella when she stepped into the ballroom for the first time, years before moving to the island. She didn't need a prince to save her, she had her mother, if only until the stroke of midnight. That night was Norma Jean's favorite memory of her mother, one of the few good ones. The 7-year-old watched her mother twirl around the dance floor. At one point in the evening, her mother disappeared into a sea of dancers. Norma Jean panicked. Gladys had a way of disappearing on her daughter. But on this particular night, her mother reappeared from the crowd of faceless adults and took Norma Jean into her arms. It should come as no surprise that innumerable tales of ghostly encounters surround the casino. On the mezzanine level, tour guides have come across a middle-aged man with an old-fashioned camera hanging around his neck slip into the women's restroom. One of the tour guides even stood guard, but after 20 minutes, grew impatient and went into the restroom to look for the man, who was nowhere to be found. Numerous witnesses recall hearing a disembodied voice of a woman yelling, "Get out!" coming from inside the woman's restroom. Theater goers have seen a strange man dressed in old-fashioned clothing literally walk right through the wall separating the lobby from the inside of the theater. In another instance, a translucent figure of an elderly woman in a long white robe has been spotted floating through the lobby, sometimes even asking, "Where's my husband?" There have been a number of sightings of Marilyn's ghost strolling along the AVALON boardwalk in front of Lloyd's, the ice cream shop where she worked while living on Catalina. There are only a few photos of Norma Jean on Catalina, and most of these photos were taken on Middle Beach and the AVALON boardwalk. In 2011, I returned to Catalina for the first time since my mother's death. I was ready to create new memories on the island, and this time I brought my future husband with me for his first time on the island. It wasn't until this time that I learned that Marilyn had lived on the island. On that trip, I went to the Before She Was Marilyn exhibition at the Catalina Museum, which used to be housed here at the Catalina Casino. I'm sitting in the exact same spot where Marilyn Monroe sat when she was living in Catalina. It's amazing that so little has been written about her time on Catalina when so little has changed on the island.
Endlessly blue above me. Endlessly blue.
On Sundays, Doherty took Norma Jean to the Catalina Bird Park, a popular attraction for over 35 years.
Catalina Bird Park has one of the world's greatest collection of rare, colorful, and unusual birds. It has never been operated for profit, and admission is free to visitors.
All that remains now of the park is the entrance and a giant bird cage. The frame was from the original Catalina Casino. There are some really awesome photos of Norma Jean hanging out here when this used to be a bird sanctuary.
Hello there, Miss Penguin. Whither away? For a date with Donald Duck? Hey there! Where do you expect to find Donald? At the bottom of the pool?
It's now a kid's playground. And a fun little tidbit, the sound team for the movie The Wizard of Oz spent a week at the park recording bird sounds that were used as the spooky sounds in the witch's haunted forest. Ooh, spooky. Catalina has its very own pet cemetery.
What is this place? I brought you here to bury Alan's cat.
What did we do tonight, Judd?
What we did was a secret.
Well, it's late afternoon, sailing time, and some of us will have to go back to the mainland again. It's hard to break away. The lure of Catalina is strong, and when the island casts its magic spell over us, we want to stay here forever, to forget all the cares and worries of everyday life, just dream the days away on this enchanted Pacific isle. We can't say goodbye. We can only say, hasta la vista. We'll see you soon.
Like all good things, Norma Jean's time on Catalina came to an end a year and a half after arriving on the island paradise. Norma Jean was free for the first time in her life on Catalina, and as it turned out, it'd be the freest she'd ever be. 20 years after leaving Catalina, Norma Jean was found dead here in her Brentwood home. She was discovered in the nude, laying face down in her bed, with a telephone in one hand and a bunch of empty pill bottles on the nightstand. She was only 36 years old. I wonder if Catalina crossed her mind in those final moments of her short life. On Catalina, Norma Jean was free. The same could be said for Natalie's time on the island. She found a floating sanctuary on Splendor. And for a while, Catalina brought both women peace. Marilyn once said of Catalina, "In all the world, no trip like this."